The challenge is that if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you have issues with fertility, you have brain fog, concentration issues, you have cardiac issues, liver detox issues, exercise-induced fatigue, all these things. And so working on mitochondrial function is so important. Insulin resistance actually is the biggest reason why we have mitochondrial dysfunction overall. But in essence, what methylene blue can do is compensate for that mitochondrial issue and reboot, regenerate, and optimize it. We all think about dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, and we focus on those superstar neurotransmitters. But in the essence, they're much less around than your GABA and your glutamate. GABA is our primary relaxing neurotransmitter in the brain. Many of us now, because we're on all the time, don't know how to relax, don't know how to calm down. And a part of that is because we've forgotten what it feels like to be parasympathetic. And additional part of that is that many of us walking around these days are GABA deficient. I'm a really big fan of nicotine. If you're leaving it at much lower doses, maybe somebody would call it a microdose, I love it.
Dr. Scott, as a biohacker, I'm guessing you're experimenting with new nootropics and modalities all the time. Anything new on the horizon you're playing with right now that's showing promise?
Biohacker, such an interesting word for you to start with me, Jesse, overall. I think of myself more as what I would call a biont hacker, BIONT hacker, hacker, right? And the reason for that is that biohacking is really cool. It's been around now for about a decade or so. And I was involved in the beginnings of these things many years ago in 2013, 2014, getting involved with hyperbaric medicine from an optimal performance perspective there. But what I've really gathered over the years is that a framework for your biohacking is very, very important. And so what I truly feel is sort of next generation biohacking, something that I've been doing for several years now, is working with patients, and myself included here, on creating a way to frame it as how can you optimize your biohacking by optimizing foundational health biomarkers and then getting all fancy along the way. So I with patients and myself and the people that I work with overall, it's having a framework and having a methodology that includes more of a slow play when it comes to bringing in the tools and technologies and practices. Now, that all being said, what am I working on right now? I'm a really big fan of nicotine. I got to tell you, Jesse, I think that, there's products that I have with one of my companies that does have nicotine in it. But nicotine is one of those things where it's a fantastic cognitive enhancer. It really does work very quickly. The half-life is very short. It's only about an hour to two hours. So you get cognitive benefit, you get verbal fluidity, you get memory recall, your executive functions better so you can keep things in your mind easier. And if you keep the doses super low, less than about 4 milligrams per day, and you don't vape it, you don't smoke it, those are not ever good things to do with anything really, but especially nicotine, because nicotine in those ways is usually with other additives, either in the cigarettes themselves or in the vaping products, and a much higher dose. A cigarette has 26 milligrams of nicotine in it. A cigar, by the way, has 100 milligrams of nicotine in it, just for relative. But if you're leaving it at much lower doses, maybe somebody would call it a microdose, I love it. It's something you can take regularly. You can take it even closer to before bed if you need to, as long as you don't have a significant response to it that's longer. But usually the half-life is just a couple hours. So nicotine is not always bad for us. And I've been playing around with it much more often, but in the sense that nicotine is also stimulating the brain, right? And to use nicotine, even as these low doses as an anti-inflammatory, as a cognitive enhancer, it's also making the brain work harder. So it's important, again, to think about what are you doing on a day-to-day level to optimize your brain function, and not just using nicotine after a bad night of sleep or drinking alcohol or going to McDonald's that day and say, oh, I'm just going to take some nicotine, it's going to be all better. That's not what I'm trying to say here. And I think most biohackers and people that use that term think about it in that context. But I guess, so foundational framework, biont hacking, and the reason why biont is called the biont, it's called the holobiont. Have you heard of the word holobiont before, Jesse?
I have, yes.
Yeah. So the holobiont is your whole organism. It's everything that's happening to you. It's your own biology, but not just your cells, everything inside of you, everything that's coming outside of you, that's all being integrated and networked in your system. So the holobiont hacking, that's what I would be doing on a regular basis. And nicotine is one of the ones that I've been using more often than recently. It's been one of my favorites recently.
All right, we're going to come back to the foundation piece. Like you said, super important to get that right before you start tinkering with some of these other things we're going to get into.
Yeah.
But nicotine, this is one, a lot of controversy. And you've mentioned, smoking and vaping. Obviously, those things are terrible for us. This is different.
Yes.
Exactly. But talk about you mentioned your product that contains it. Talk about different ways of taking that in. And then you mentioned, I think was it 4 milligrams per day?
Yeah, 4 milligrams of nicotine.
To not have the addictive properties.
Right.
Okay. And would you take that all at once? Say you're performing like on a show like this, or, doing a talk in front of a group of people. How do you spread that out if you're going to utilize that 4 milligrams within a day?
Everybody's going to be a little bit different here overall. Some people will take 4 milligrams at a time, but most people won't. Most people take maybe a half to 1 milligram, maybe up to 3 milligrams at a time to see the benefits from a cognitive perspective. Now, if you're keeping it less than 4 milligrams in total per day, you're likely not going to have any issues with addiction at all, where you need to have more of the dose to get to the same benefit overall. So the nicotine is addicting on its own. It increases dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. So these are happy chemicals or motivating chemicals. And that's why it also increases acetylcholine, which is another neurotransmitter that helps with cognition and memory and focus. And so when you're using these low doses, you're getting those benefits, but you're not getting too much where it's going to be potentially causing too much of a reward aspect of things. So if you see people in the biohacking space, for example, that are spraying nicotine all the time, this is not very good to do, because even if the nicotine spray is a milligram, if you're using a spray every hour, this is what I see people doing. They start off at maybe 3 or 4 times a day, and they're like, oh, I really like this. They do more and more and more, and like 5 sprays at a time. Like, people can get addicted to these. Now, the good news though is that nicotine addiction, especially with like more of a straight type of nicotine, and we can talk about different ways you can get it, right, is less challenging to break if you're not smoking it or vaping it overall. So smoking and vaping nicotine at these high doses, extremely high doses, is very hard, especially because the other products in them, the vaping products, the combustibles in there, along with the additives in cigarettes, make nicotine more addictive. They've been designed this way. They've been created so that they've been bred with strains over the years, especially tobacco-containing products, to make the additives in them more addictive. And also, that more of the cancer-causing ingredients in these products are actually not the nicotine itself, but the additional ingredients in there. So the ways I typically recommend using nicotine is in nicotine gum is okay. Nicotine patches are interesting, and I'm getting more interested in using those in clinical practice, actually. There's a number of practitioners that I work with now that are using it for long COVID and seeing some fantastic benefits of using more of a slow release of the nicotine. I know a couple docs that will refuse to go through a full day of work at the office without a nicotine patch on these days. And those are not addictive at all, because they're just slow releasing on your arm, right? So the idea really is that you want to have nicotine sources that are relatively slow acting. So the most slow acting is going to be a patch overall. And the patches come in different strengths, and you can actually cut up the patches into smaller amounts and take them, although it'll tell you not to cut up the pouch when you get it, or the patch when you get it, but you can cut them up. You don't know exactly how much you're getting, but I think in the future, you're going to see more companies coming out with like 1 milligram patches or 2 milligram patches. Those don't exist right now. I think the smallest patch dosing is about 7 milligrams, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 7, 12, and 21 or something like that. So, but anyway, so you can get nicotine patch. You can also get like a nicotine lozenge. And so, when my company has something that's a combination of nicotine with CBD, methylene blue, and caffeine, and that's a nice, fantastic synergistic approach to help with focus and cognition and things like that. And so that's a dissolvable lozenge that goes in your mouth and dissolves over about 15 to 30 minutes. Also, again, slow release. And so people have actually requested we just give one that's full nicotine as a lozenge. Maybe we'll do that one day. But right now, having a slow release in the mouth is fantastic, right? Because you have 15 to 30 minutes when it's coming onto the system. So it's not immediately, but you feel it really quickly overall within about that time frame, even sometimes faster. The sprays are a little bit more dicey, actually. You can't get sprayed nicotine in the United States, but you can get it very easily in European countries, for example. The spray tends to be almost like an inhalant overall. And so because you're spraying it and you're kind of breathing it in as it's going into the system. So it's a little bit more addictive to use the spray because it's happening faster overall. So you have to be a little bit more careful with that. So those are, and you can also swallow your nicotine, but that's not the greatest way to do it. Usually it's better to dissolve in the mouth or to do a spray or to do a patch. But again, no smoking, no vaping, not a good idea.
All right. So at these low levels, not addictive.
Exactly.
But even coffee, we know caffeine is addictive, and it's something a lot of people use to enhance their mornings, enhance their days. You talked about it being in that one product there with a couple of other nootropics. Is it like that though? Do you find for yourself and other people where you start using it and you start feeling good, and to go a day or two without it at that point feels like you're missing something?
So it can feel that way, right? Because you can feel the difference when you take a little bit of nicotine. So, but it's not going to be physio. It's not going to be. It can be cognitive. So there's different types of dependence, right? There's a dependence that's more a physiologic dependence, where your body has a response when you stop it. If you're taking less than 4 milligrams of nicotine a day, that should not happen. Caffeine is a very similar kind of thing. If you keep the doses of caffeine extremely low, you will not have a withdrawal effect of taking caffeine overall. So if you take caffeine periodically, but I very well know, and maybe you've had this experience, like stopping drinking coffee, if you've been drinking a decent amount for a while, you're not going to feel good for, it could be a week, it could be a month, it depends on the person, right? So there's the physiologic dependence of the actual compound, and then there's the cognitive dependence of it as well, right? But my deal always with any kind of stimulant, coffee, nicotine, other nootropics, you always want to be thinking about the brain health itself. Is the brain healthy? Are you optimizing your brain function? And that's why there's different types of nootropics out there. There's nootropics that are more clocking the system or more enhancing the system to perform a task or a function, but may not necessarily be healthy for the brain. And then there's other nootropics that are enhancing the system to perform a task, but at the same time, they're more on the healthier side of actually for brain function. And a good example of a more healthy nootropic in essence would be something like L-tyrosine. L-tyrosine is an amino acid that, when it gets into the body, converts into dopamine, and then dopamine converts into norepinephrine. So these are going to help you with your dopaminergic signaling and your norepinephrine signaling, but it's more supportive because it's an amino acid that gets converted, as opposed to giving you something that's hammering out dopamine and norepinephrine directly, like nicotine, for example. And so it's a nuanced discussion, right? Because people want to feel better now, but you really don't want to sacrifice today or sacrifice the future for today as much as you absolutely can. I mean, sometimes we have no choice. Sometimes we really need to focus now, and we have to deal with the consequences later. But if you can find a more supportive way to operationalize this, to operationalize it in the sense of, are you sticking with healthy things that are supporting your brain? So, like one thing, for example, in coffee is not just caffeine. Coffee has polyphenols. It has other antioxidants in there that are supporting the system at the same time as you're drinking coffee. So that's a good thing overall. So that's why caffeine pills are not as good as coffee for most people, because coffee is going to have more of those antioxidants and polyphenols that are supporting the system. And so when you're thinking about nicotine, at least the way I think about it is that I'm not just going to have nicotine on a day-to-day basis without supporting my brain in other ways. Am I taking my antioxidants, my B vitamins? Am I optimizing my brain function? Am I looking at laboratory data that's going to support what I'm doing over the long term and not just a short-term gain?
I think a fun way to go through some of these other nootropics is to talk about a typical day for you.
Okay.
And obviously it's different depending on what you're doing that day, and you're emphasizing the point of different days and different protocols. But say a day you're performing, say you're giving a keynote and it's in the afternoon and you want to build up to that. Talk about how you start your day. And I want everything, things like coffee in the morning. Let's talk about the full protocol of what you do to get your brain and body ready for something like that.
I love it. So the first thing on my list every single time is sleep. Okay. And so this is something that we emphasize a lot. I work with a colleague. His name is Dr. Ted. He's the founder of a couple of our companies. And he likes to say that your day starts when you go to bed, not when you wake up. And I think if you can shift your framework here, and believe me, this hasn't been easy personally. Okay. I'm a physician. I went through medical school training. We had shirts on that would say sleep is for quitters. Sleep when you're dead. Everybody's heard these things before. And when you're a type A kind of person, you think of sleep last, obviously. And this is just our culture. It's our hustle culture. But the first thing I'm always thinking about here when I'm trying to perform my best is to optimize my sleep. And there's a ton of things that go into that. Of course, the things that you do before you go to bed, your sleep routine itself, where you're going to be sleeping, how you're going to sleep. You're going to have a sound machine and earplugs, and I can go into all that if you want. But I'd
like to. We have a lot of time here. Let's really take our time, and I'll jump in when needed. And I really want to get the details on the different aspects of the day.
I love it. So for me, the big things are, if I'm home, especially like if I'm traveling, it's going to be different. But if I'm home and I have, a lot of speaking to do the next day, podcasts to record, family, whatever it might be, where I might have to be really cognitively ready, my sleep routine is almost always the same every night. And I highly recommend that anybody listening is thinking about sleep as something that is as regimented as possible for you. And in the sense that you're trying to go to bed at the same time every night within plus or minus, like honestly, 5 to 10 minutes, if you can do it. And then that sleep routine that you have that goes into before you hit the pillow can last for me anywhere between 10 minutes when I'm traveling to an hour and a half when I'm home. And what that typically starts off with for me is I have in my basement an infrared sauna. And so every night when I close off my computer, I help with my kids when they're bedtime and get them in bed and we do our thing. For me, what I do, my personal self-care, is at least 30 minutes in an infrared sauna. And then in the sauna, that's when I'm really starting to wind down. I'm doing my meditations. I'm doing my breathing. Sometimes if it's not a night where I have to perform super good the next day, I might like watch something on Netflix, but that's uncommon. But I'm going to be honest, right? It's not always perfect. Okay. Life doesn't have to be perfect. We just do our best. Okay, everybody. And I want everybody to think that I have this like perfect life that I'm doing this every night. But when I know I have to perform the next day, I'm doing my meditation. I'm doing my breathing. Sometimes I'm doing some writing in there. Sometimes I'm, journaling. Other times I'm being creative in there. I'll bring a pen and paper and just start doodling or something like that. And just, trying to just allow my mind to be creative and off a screen as much as I can. So 30 minutes, I'm hydrating in there, of course. And so I'm having some mineral water, or I'm having some water with a little bit of salt in it. I don't get crazy. I used to do more of the hydration packets and things like that with Element and others, but I don't do as much of that anymore, actually. I just kind of make my own little concoctions at the house, just with a little bit of salt, good either Celtic sea salt or mineral salt of some sort. And so I'm staying hydrated in there. So once I finish my sauna, I take a shower, obviously, because I'm sweaty. Then I do a little bit of red light. Typically, sometimes I'll do a red light before I go in the sauna. Sometimes I will after. Just depends on the day. But oftentimes, I often actually do it mostly before I go into the sauna. It helps me kind of heat up and also relax my nervous system a little bit. They're separate. So the red light's in one location, and then I go into the sauna after that. So after the sauna is a shower. And then after the shower, I go upstairs and I take my supplements for the evening. And those vary depending on the day, but for the most part, they're pretty steady. Usually what I have at night is I'll have a couple different things. I've been playing around recently with some collagen protein powder. Collagen has one particular amino acid in it called glycine. And glycine is one of our it's actually the most, the amino acid that we have most in the body, actually. And so glycine is also a amino acid that calms us down. So it works on the parasympathetic nervous system and it relaxes us overall. So I'll take that. And then I'll also have another supplement that I take on a regular basis. It's based on the cordyceps mushroom. It's called cordycepin, and it's something called Tromune at our company, Transcriptions. And cordycepin is the most active component of the cordyceps mushroom. So many people take cordyceps in the morning. Cordyceps has been known for thousands of years in Chinese medicine to be a fantastic anti-inflammatory. It can help with exercise performance. It's actually shown to increase your VO2 max and ATP production. But the main reason why we use cordycepin is that cordycepin is a fantastic anti-inflammatory. It works on a number of different pathways, things like NF-kappa B, mTOR, AMPK, and we can go into all those if you'd like. But it works on sort of the downregulation of your inflammatory cascades. It also works as an immune system modulator. So it addresses things like viral infections. It's been studied in asthma, in allergies, and things like that. And also, it increases deep sleep. And it does that because cordycepin works just like something called adenosine in the body. Adenosine has a lot of different roles. The one that many people know of is adenosine triphosphate, ATP, obviously. And so adenosine can help with energy production, but it also works in the brain because we have receptors in the brain that when adenosine binds, makes you feel sleepy and increases your sleep pressure. So adenosine is, so if you have kids, or if people have family members that have children, you feel that sleep pressure, that sort of needing to go to sleep really hard. Like in your kids, if they miss that window, they're crying, they're fussy. It's like all of that adenosine is building up through the day from energy production, by the way, right? And so that adenosine buildup helps us feel sleepy. And so we were talking about coffee just a minute ago, but caffeine, what it does, it blocks the adenosine receptors. And that's why you feel more wakeful when you have your coffee in the morning, because it blocks those receptors. And so adenosine itself has lots of different roles, as mentioned, but in this case, I'm using the cordyceps to increase my deep sleep, which it does. And I've measured this, and many people can attest to this as well. And I've used it prophylactically now for a long time, because I have 4 children at my house, and somebody is always, almost always coming in with something. They're older now, so it's not like they're in daycare or kindergarten where everybody's kind of slabbering all over each other all the time, but I still get a decent amount of that. And so, for example, all my kids and my wife had the flu in January. I did not get it. And this is because I can modulate my dose of the tromium, of the cordyceps, depending on what that exposure is like. So it increases my deep sleep and it protects me. So at night, I have my cordyceps, my tromium, I have my collagen protein powder. Sometimes I'll have magnesium as well. I tend to be very sensitive to magnesium overall. So I'll typically take it actually during the day, different type of magnesium, not the one that's more sedating in general. Magnesium citrate, magnesium oxide. These are ones that are more good for laxative effects. So if you're having issues with your bowel movement, sometimes I'll have patients of mine take those at night. But in general, from magnesium optimization in the body, most of us are magnesium deficient. I'll take a magnesium chelate, a magnesium glycinate, sometimes a combination of others as well. So that's pretty much it at night. It's going to be the magnesium, the collagen, the cordyceps, hydration, and sometimes I'll take some peptides as well. I have in the past. Right now, I'm not on a cycle of it, but I will take a growth hormone like peptides. So your ipamorelin, CJC, those kinds of things, and use them as well. And this is based on laboratory testing that I've done and that I continue to do for my hormone analysis over time. So I'm always modulating my supplementation depending on what I need, not just taking things because I think they're cool or that I think that they're going to be helpful. Although sometimes we do add those things on without being able to have a direct laboratory marker to look at overall. But in general, I try to optimize my supplementation with what's going on in my laboratory analysis, my hormones, et cetera, and do it that way. So I think that's pretty much it. And then, shall I keep going? Do you have questions? Because I'm going to
Let me jump in. Yeah, I want a couple of follow-ups here. And then we'll get to the morning.
Well, I'm not done with the nighttime yet. So I have
okay, well, we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
So brand names, if you're comfortable, I'd love to know for sauna and red light, brands you recommend, because there are so many different brands and new ones coming in all the time. And myself, even being fully immersed in this world, I wonder about quality and reputations.
Yep.
What is it you're using?
So funny story about my sauna. It's a Sunlighten. I got it in 2017, I believe, or 2016. And so at the time I was living in Northern California, and I was living in a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, and I had 3 kids. And then I found out my wife was pregnant with our 4th. And I was like, well, holy shit. We have a very small house with lots of children, and I just need to do something for myself here. And so it was a lot of money for me at the time, but I purchased a Sunlighten sauna. We put it in our semi-finished basement there in California. And it was my room. It was the place that I would go to as a place to be doing some self-care. And it's become a nightly thing, a part of my routine. There's very few nights when I'm at my house here in Colorado where I live now. I moved the sauna with me to Colorado here, that I don't get in the sauna on a nightly basis. So there's lots of different saunas out there right now. I think if I had to choose again, I would probably find one that was not just infrared, but also had the capacity to do high heat Finnish type of sauna as well. I forget the name of the brand, but I can help you with the show notes. Because there's one that I found a couple of my patients have, and a few of my friends in the biohacking space like a lot. And I can look it up later, but that's a combination of both the infrared and the high heat as well. So in a perfect world, I think I would love to have both. I live in Colorado, so and you live in Canada, so having cold exposure is not that difficult, but having the heat exposure and also the high heat exposure would be nice. I would probably be using that more during the day at times overall if I had that capacity. But anyway, so I have a sunlight and sauna. When it comes to red light panels, you're right. There's a huge variation in what's out there. My company, I have a company called One Base Health, and we have our own suite of products, including hyperbaric chambers and lights and cold plunges and things like that. So I get them from my company. I know what I'm getting. I know the light, the spectrum, the power, the joules, all those kinds of things. And so from a consumer brand perspective, we have those available at One Base if that's interesting to people. There's also, I like the EMR Tech company. They're pretty good, and Bon Charge is pretty good too, because I just know that I know those companies well. I know that they're coming out and doing the research on their technology overall. So the sort of the dirty little secret in this world, Jesse, is that most lights are coming from like 3 companies in China, is what it comes down to. And no matter what your company is called as a light company, it's probably coming from one of those factories. And so there's a couple guys that have done a really good job doing like a whole deep dive into this. One of the guys that I like, he's a friend of mine. His name is Ari Witten. I don't know if you know Ari. Ari's in Southern California. He has a book on light and the various things you want to look at. So if you really want to dive deep into this topic, that's a great book. I forget the name of it, but Ari Witten is his name. He has his own podcast. It's called the Blueprint. I forget the whole title of it, but he's great, and he's got a really great book on it. So that's a place to look if you really want to dive into like comparisons and things like that as well. From a supplementation perspective, what I'm typically doing is I'm usually going with practitioner brands of various supplements that I use. I highly recommend that anybody listening to this does not buy their supplements on Amazon. Just full stop. Because the problem is that you don't know what you're getting. You may be thinking you're getting something from a reputable company, but there was something that I learned about a couple of years ago, a company called Metagenics, which has been around forever. They were on Amazon, and people were getting these rancid products from Metagenics in the mail from Amazon, finding out they were not Metagenics at all. It was all counterfeit. And so this is really, really challenging, right? So whenever I'm working with my clients, I do not ever recommend buying supplements through Amazon as much as possible. Buying directly from the supplement manufacturers that you trust are the ways to do it. As a practitioner, I use a couple different platforms. The one I use mostly is called FullScript, which is where I know the guys that run that company for many years. I know what they're doing. I know the quality that they're looking at when they're bringing supplements on their platform specifically. So in my life, what I use a lot of pure encapsulations, actually, even though they were bought by Nestle. I don't hold that against them too much. Designs for Health, I use a lot of. I use some Now brand of things, which is available over the counter. It's a very good brand. Some Jarrow products as well that are pretty good. My magnesium, I think, is pure encapsulations. The cordycepin, the tromunes from my company Transcriptions, which I implicitly care about and trust because I'm involved in the making of those products. And the challenge with supplement companies in general, as you know, Jesse, is it's a self-regulation process. Like you don't have to do anything. I can go into my basement tomorrow and pack something in a supplement and go online and sell it. And so it's a really big deal that you're looking at quality when you're looking at supplements. And so, of course, with my family, me personally, with my clients, I really care about all those things. And then I think for the collagen right now, I've been using Vital Proteins. I think it's called Vital Proteins. And I like their company. They've been around a while. They're good. They're well tested. But I change it around sometimes. But that's the one I've been using mostly now.
All right, that's great. A couple things I want to highlight when it comes to quality. The Amazon piece, I've heard of that before. And I think for a period of time, I stayed away from ordering. But lately, I've been looking for brands when I order on there that say they're shipping from Amazon. Right. Do you know if that's enough? I had assumed if it's coming from Amazon's warehouse, they've done the quality check. No? Okay. No. So that's going to change things for me because I have been ordering those.
I worry. If you want to buy clothes, if you want to buy radio, like whatever, people don't buy radios, whatever you buy, like electronic wise anymore, that's better, I think, overall. And I think that there's more recourse if you buy a laptop on Amazon, it doesn't work. There's ways you can get a new one, for example. You don't know what you're getting on the supplement side. I just, like, for example, we'll talk about methylene blue later when my morning routine, but that's a big one where like I've just seen a huge amount of crappy stuff online, and I just go, please don't buy this stuff on Amazon. You just don't know what you're getting. So if I was going to buy something on Amazon, it would be being fulfilled by the company that is on Amazon selling it. So if it's Designs for Health, for example, which is another brand that I use a lot, fulfilled by Designs for Health, not in an Amazon warehouse, as much as possible. The temperature regulation in these warehouses all over the place too, like the heat stability of your supplements might change depending on the temperatures. If it's in a Vegas warehouse versus it's in a Florida warehouse, or it's in the Philippine warehouse where it's really humid. I don't know, right? So I tend to be very emphatic about this with the people that I work with and myself personally.
All right. The other piece I wanted to highlight is pure encapsulations. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the BioVer. Since then, I've totally been avoiding that brand. I used to use them all the time.
Yep.
Good to hear that you still feel confident in that product. I'll have to do a bit more research and potentially dive back in there.
It's one of those things, like a lot of us in the health and wellness space, once a company gets bought by one of these conglomerates, you can have either one of two reactions, like, I'm never using that product again. It's owned by Nestle. It's going to be ridiculous. Or the other option is like, wow, Nestle's buying this product. Now they have a natural, more optimized product that they're using. At least they're going to distribute it to more places. So people might actually have the opportunity of not having some shitty Flintstone vitamin from Costco. Instead, they can buy something with pure encapsulations. Like, that's fantastic. And I go back and forth on this too. It depends on the product, depends on the company. And you have to be monitoring these things over time, because definitely quality can go down if these companies aren't careful. But I've actually spoken to the people up here, and everything is still very separate there from Nestle. So I feel much more comfortable. For example, other companies maybe not so much. But in general, I like to do my research if these buyouts do happen, and I watch things over time. Yeah.
Good to know about that company.
Yeah.
And there's different layers to this as well, where if you're buying a product, and you mentioned methylene blue, if the company isn't producing a quality product, you could have other contaminants in there.
Exactly.
You could have a product you expect to work a certain way and you don't feel the benefits. Again, methylene blue, when I take your product, I feel it right away. Maybe you get turned on to methylene blue, you give it a try, you get this crappy brand on Amazon, you don't feel it, and you put it away for, the rest of your life, and you don't give it another shot. So there's different aspects, but quality does matter, like it does with everything, saunas and food and everything we're going to get into.
Yeah. So you mentioned purity and potency. Liquids, especially with methylene blue, are never as potent as they say on the label. We've done the testing. So if it says you're getting a milligram per dropper or something, number one, a dropper is very, very subjective overall. Or like there's one company that says one drop is 0.5 milligrams. It just doesn't exist that way. We've noticed this on testing. And then you talk about the purity, which is contamination. And this is across the board, but especially in methylene blue, lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, these are contaminants that you can find. And so, yes, I'm very, very clear that when you're purchasing supplements, try to do it through a reputable company, try to do it through a reputable site, or if you're going on Amazon, if it's going to be on Amazon, having it fulfilled by the company that is on Amazon selling you the product.
There was also some research a number of years back showing that when they did tests on different supplements, they weren't even finding the active ingredient or what was supposed to be in it. So that's another whole layer on top of this.
Yeah. This is a big thing with things with erectile dysfunction. Like they found that they actually had real Viagra, Cialis in it, the PDE5 inhibitors, that it was supposed to be a natural performance enhancer, but it had all these things in it. And so you can find this across the board in all different types of supplements out there. My least favorite is the proprietary blends in general. Because if you find a supplement that says I have a proprietary blend of 17 different herbs, you have no idea how much of each of those herbs is in there. Now, this is not a bad thing across the board. There are some companies that have been around a long time, like Gaia, for example. They have better quality control, I think. But in general, I try not to give people things that have proprietary blends, because you just don't know of the 10 things that are in that blend, what is in that blend exactly at all. And so that's another kind of pet peeve of mine in the supplement side of things.
All right. And to really get in the weeds on the sauna piece before we get back to your night routine, you mentioned the Finnish saunas, which I'm seeing more and more people in our world using those.
Yeah.
You're using infrared. There's even within infrared, far and near infrared. I assume you're talking about far
Far
because most
infrared.
people
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
but talk about the difference there and if you see any benefit to near as well.
Near infrared is kind of like your near infrared light, right? So near infrared is going to be your spectrum. Typically, it's going to be about 680 nanometers. And so that's your, what we would call like red light exposure. Okay. So it's a whole different sort of category of light. So you have your near infrared, which can be very good for many things, and we can talk about that. And then many of these new saunas are coming out with near infrared panels, which I think is funny because you have to be super close to this panel to be able for it to work. Okay, everybody. So like if your near infrared light panel is like 6 feet above your head or even a foot above your head, it's not doing much at all. Okay. And so, but far infrared is far infrared light that you don't see. It's simulating the light that would come from the sun that makes you feel hot. It's that heat when you're in infrared sauna that's heating you up from the inside out. So you feel like when you're infrared sauna, when you're in one, you feel hot, but you start sweating like almost from like the inside out, as opposed to if you're in like a high heat sauna, for example, if you're in a Finnish type of sauna, it's over 180 degrees Fahrenheit, then you're going to start feeling like you're bludgeoned with heat. Like you just start sweating from the outside. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a different type of stimulus overall. And near infrared light it will be mildly hot, or like more like warm kind of thing, but it won't be so hot that you'll get a sweat typically from it. So near infrared light, especially around the 600 to 680 nanometer wavelength, is what we're talking about when people are looking at the panels, right? These are the panels that we're talking about. And the main thing with the panels at those wavelengths is improving vasodilation, mitochondrial optimization overall with nitric oxide production in your mitochondria. And so you're looking at it more from a cellular perspective. It can be great for wound healing. It can be great for overall just recalibration of your mitochondria in the sense of helping them work a little bit more efficiently. And then you have the far infrared sauna, which is more of your inside out heat, and then you have your heat coming from a Finnish type of sauna, which is more of like bludgeoning you with heat. More as I think of the outside, the Finnish type of sauna as being more like simulating exercise. It's going to increase your heart rate. You're going to get your heart rate up. You're going to start sweating a lot. You're going to release things called like heat shock proteins, which are associated with longevity. Like this is why people in Finland that's why they call them Finnish like saunas. They have many people that are older can't exercise as much, but they can go into a Finnish sauna and get exercise being in the sauna itself. And so that's kind of how I think about the breakdown. And I think there's a role for all three.
Would you say that exercise benefit comes with the far infrared as well, or just with the Finnish?
I don't think it's the same for far infrared. I mean, the research is not as prolific with the infrared saunas, the far infrared versus the Finnish type. My sense clinically and using them personally and working with patients using them for the last decade or so is that I think of the infrared sauna as more of a detox technology, more of something that's helping from the inside, helping with the detoxification processes, helping you kind of reset your sympathetic parasympathetic balance in a more soft and gentle way overall. The Finnish saunas, the Finnish ones where they're bludgeoning you with heat, it's more of like a hormetic stress. It's more of like a stress on the system, where far infrared doesn't seem to be as much of a stress on the system, more supportive. And so, like for example, when I go into my infrared sauna, my heart rate won't go above around 100, 105 beats per minute. But if I go into a Finnish type sauna, you're going to, depending on how long you're in there, you could be 130, 140, 150, or even higher, especially if you're doing other things in the sauna too, which some people do and get crazy with like assault bikes and crazy things like that, which I don't recommend for most people. But in general, that's why it's more like simulating, full on exercise, as opposed to being around 100 beats per minute it's more tolerable for people too that are sicker. And that's a big thing too, is that if you already have a lot going on, if you have chronic complex medical issues, if you have a lot of inflammation in the system, I don't recommend a high heat sauna typically. I recommend a far infrared. And then you can use it at night as a way to kind of help with the detox processes and kind of getting your brain ready for detoxification more when you're sleeping, which is part of that system called your lymphatic system, or specifically in your brain, your glymphatic system. So our brain has its own lymphatic system, which was just discovered maybe about a decade ago, that helps us at night get all the garbage away from our brain so that we can optimize our brain function throughout the next day with good sleep.
Okay, so when you go in the sauna, you mentioned salt in your water.
Yep.
It used to be more of an electrolyte, but you've gone to that.
Yeah.
You talked about a bunch of different things you'll do in there, but more relaxing,
Yes.
meditating, journaling, watching Netflix the odd time.
The odd time. Yeah.
What about other hacks while you're in there? Things like niacin flush or taking certain supplements to enhance the detox part of that protocol. Are you into that?
I hate niacin. Yeah, I don't like the feeling of the flush, man. I've done it before, and I do use it with certain patients overall, but it's not part of my daily or regular routine. But if I do have people that need more detoxification capacity, it is something that I will try to get them to do. I was just reading a study recently on plasticizers that come out in people's sweat when they detox. And so BPA, these plasticizers that we use, they can come out in your sweat. We know that toxins can come out in your sweat. And so if you can increase vasodilatory response like that, you can see a benefit overall from getting more of these toxins out of the system. And I've seen this in working with patients and looking at their detoxification markers, their signs of oxidative stress, which is similar to that. And then heavy metals and styrenes and plastics, you can see a benefit using things like niacin. But I don't typically use that personally myself. In other patients, we'll talk about doing other things in the sauna that can increase their sweating overall, especially if they have an infrared sauna. I might have them do like a little bit of light exercise overall, sometimes even heavier exercise in some of my performance athletes as well, to help with the sweating response and helping with the detoxification response if they're relatively well optimized. But I keep it pretty simple for people. Mostly and for myself, it's mostly just hydration and really working on, and this is sort of part of the additional parts of my evening routine, are the parasympathetic activation, the shutting off of our brain. Optimizing our sleep is so important, to drop down into parasympathetic mode as fast as you can, or as fast as you can is the wrong way to say it. It's more as supportively as you can as you're winding yourself down for bed. And so even before the infrared sauna, sometimes what I'll sometimes do at night, and if this is getting too complicated, let me know. But I'll also be thinking about starting to downregulate that nervous system even before, and that could be any number of things. But it usually is working on the GABAergic neurotransmitter system. So working on our GABA neurotransmitter system. GABA is our primary relaxing neurotransmitter in the brain. Many of us now, because we're on all the time, don't know how to relax, don't know how to calm down, and that's a part of that is because we've forgotten what it feels like to be parasympathetic. And additional part of that is that many of us walking around these days are GABA deficient, meaning that we don't have enough GABA in the system to help us calm down. And this happens because of too much stress, toxins in our environment, a leaky gut, a leaky brain, which is associated with a leaky gut. So our blood-brain barrier is not doing what it's supposed to do, causing inflammation, causing more stress. And so this is why many people, after their kids go to bed or after they finish dinner or while they're making dinner, they have that glass of wine, right? They have that glass of wine with them, or 2 or 5 or half a bottle or whatever. Alcohol is working on the GABA system. The problem with alcohol, as I think you probably know, Jesse, is that there's not many good things about it overall in the long term. But in this capacity, it will make you feel more relaxed for a period of time, but it binds to the GABA receptor so tightly that it unbinds very quickly afterwards. And this is why many people who drink alcohol, and me being one, I never had the period of time where I could actually tolerate much alcohol and sleep at all. You wake up 2 hours after going to bed and you have a terrible headache overall. And this is because GABA has been depleted very quickly. And then the balance is always between this other neurotransmitter called glutamate, which is our primary excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA. Glutamate actually gets converted into GABA in our brain. It needs vitamin B6, and magnesium to do that. One of the reasons to take magnesium at night, actually, and B6 for some people. And so if you have this depletion of GABA very quickly, you have glutamate toxicity kinds of symptoms. And this is the same thing that you would have for many of us if you go to a Chinese restaurant and have MSG, monosodium glutamate. MSG is basically a direct bolus of glutamate to the brain. And so you have this glutamate toxicity syndrome, which is headaches, irritability, you can't sleep, you just don't feel right, you just don't feel good at all. This is the overabundance of glutamate. And so glutamate's good if we have enough of it and not too much, because it gives us drive, it gives us motivation, it helps us perform tasks and be on point. Between glutamate and GABA, this is 80% of our brain's neurotransmitter system. So we all think about dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, and like we focus on those superstar neurotransmitters. But in the essence, they're much less around than your GABA and your glutamate. And GABA is like your waylay station. It's your gate. It's your sensory gate. And so on average, do you know how many thoughts we have on average per day, Jesse?
I think the number might be 60, 70,000.
Nice work. First person to guess correctly. So
Oh yeah, what is it exactly?
about 70,000 on average. Yeah.
Nice.
And so that doesn't mean you're having 70,000 unique thoughts per day, but you're having 70,000 thoughts. And don't ask me how they were able to calculate this. I don't know exactly. But if you're depressed or you're anxious, that can go up to about 120,000 thoughts per day. And so you've had a full day at work, you had a full day with your kids, you're like, your mind's going on overload. You're not going to be able to sleep here. And a lot of this is because your brain is just so overloaded overall. So if you can enhance the GABA system, you can enhance the brakes of the brain, quiet down your mind. And so it's important to, I think, in my mind, find ways to wind down. And so there's obviously behaviors that you can do. And my physical behavior for that is going into the infrared sauna. But even before that, I'm thinking about, well, often nights, not every night, but many nights, I'm thinking about how I can downregulate my nervous system even still before that. And so working on the GABA system can be very, very helpful here. There's certain things in our diet actually that can help with, with our GABA system. We can talk about that later. But in general, I'm working on the GABA system before I go to bed, before I go in the infrared sauna on most evenings, especially to go back to your original question, when I have a very big day the next day. Because if you have a big day the next day, your mind is going to be more revved up about what's going to happen the day after, the next day. And so I use a combination of things. We have something called Trocom at Transcriptions, which is a combination of kava, CBD, CBG, and something called nicotinyl GABA. It's a vitamin B3 attached to a GABA itself. The thing about GABA is that you really can't take it as a supplement because it's too big of a molecule to get across into the brain. If it does work for you, if you take GABA and it works for you, it could mean that blood-brain barrier, that the barrier that's supposed to keep things out of the brain isn't working very well, and it's called a leaky brain. And sounds scary, but in the end, all that means is that you often have a leaky gut, and that needs to be addressed. And a leaky gut is when your gut's not keeping things out of your system as it's supposed to. Our gut is still thought of as the outside world. And the gut is one of the main roles of the gut is to prevent things from getting in that shouldn't get in there. And when you have a leaky barrier, things get in and cause inflammation, immune system dysfunction. They cause issues with your neurotransmitter systems, stress, sympathetic overdrive, deplete GABA, all these kinds of things in the process. So vitamin B3 attached to the GABA, the B3 has a transporter that gets across. The GABA comes with it. And so you get the GABAergic aspect of it. And then the kava, the CBD and CBG are working on the GABA receptor too. And then I'm also working on the body's, what's called the endocannabinoid system. The way to think about that is it's kind of like a homeostatic system for the brain and for the body, helps us with balance overall. So that's my combination if I really need to wind down and I know I have a big day the next day. So we don't have to go back to dinner. I think we've gotten maybe further enough into my evening routine, but wind down is something GABAergic, as I was describing, either something more physical, but more like breath work or things, but oftentimes it's going to be supplementation if I have a big day the next day, like something like Trocom. The infrared sauna is the big thing. We talked about that. And then from there, the supplementation, and then actually going into my bedroom and the routine there too, if you want to go there.
Yeah, we'll go there in a sec.
Yeah.
Before we leave saunas,
yeah.
What do you think for people that can't afford a full-on sauna, these blankets, there's these saunas that you can sit in and have your head come out of it.
Yeah.
Have you seen anybody have success with those?
I've had people tell me that they do well with certain types of those. In general, I don't think they're going to be as helpful as, going into a full sauna. What's very, very cheap overall is a hot shower. Okay. And so don't diss it, man. I use them when I travel. That's what I'll use to help. Because the other thing that's great about a sauna or a hot shower, or even a hot bath is better if you have the option, is a hot bath, is that it will downregulate your nervous system, as we talked about. It'll start getting you more parasympathetic. But at the end, in addition, it's also going to drop your body temperature. Okay. And dropping your body temperature before bed helps you go to sleep, as many of us know. And so The reason for that is that because it's so hot in the area, your body's trying to cool itself down, right? The body starts sweating. In a bath, it really can't do that as well, actually. And actually, the bath might be one of the best ways to drop your body temperature down even further because the heat exchange is less overall. And so when you get out of the bath, your body tries very hard to do that heat exchange faster. So your body temperature drops even faster out of a hot bath, for example, than even a sauna. And that's why it's also important, though, when you get out of your sauna or your hot bath or shower, that especially a hot bath, well, especially the sauna first, is that you don't want to take a really hot shower after that. You want to take more of a temperate shower because your body temperature is already dropping down. So you don't, kind of confuse the system a little bit like that. But so those are some of the options for people. I don't recommend a lot of the sauna blankets because I don't really think they have the same benefit, but I think I have had people tell me that they do work well, to help them at least drop their body temperature a little bit. But I like hot showers if you don't have the capacity to buy a sauna.
As you talk about showers and baths, what do you do to purify that water? At home, we've been using shower filters for years. Is that something you use at home? And then what about for a bath?
Yeah, so in my house, we have a whole house filtration system. So the whole house is being reverse osmosed. And so all the water that's coming in is coming in with reverse osmosis. If you don't have that capacity, then doing shower filters can be great too. And you have to make sure you replace them on a regular basis. We also have a under the sink filter that remineralizes the water as well. We had some really bad fires in my area about 3.5 years ago. And when they tested the water, it had lots of terrible things in there. We already knew this already, and we wanted to do it. We'd only been living in the house for 6 months, and that was a very good motivation to say, you know what, let's just go all out here. So we have the full house, and then we have underneath the sink, because that's how we're purifying our water at my house.
And what brand is that for the whole house?
I think it's called Springwell, I believe, or something like that. There's a lot of different companies out there. We like this one because it was a full RO. It could take a whole house, and it wasn't. There's a lot of fancier ones out there now that remineralize or even oxygenate the water or oxygenate the water as well, which I don't think is necessary overall. I mean, I think it's fancy and fun, sure, but the prices get very, very high very quickly for people. So we felt this one. This one we have to get. We get the filters, all the carbon filters changed on a yearly basis, and we're good to go. The water tastes good. Whenever my kids, drink water outside of my house, they always tell me how terrible it tastes compared to where we are in our home.
We have young kids right now, and we're not in a phase of life where we're taking baths, but we do have the shower filters. And a hack we use when they're taking a bath is just to use the shower water.
Okay.
It takes a few extra minutes to fill up, but it's definitely worth it.
I think that's great. And so I have a lot of my colleagues, actually like a good handful, that just swear by baths. They just do super hot baths at night. And I think that's great too. I think getting hot at night is not a bad thing, is what it comes down to, because it's going to drop your body temperature. And if it's going to help relax you, that's a great thing too. So for me, the infrared sauna is the way to do it. But then if my patients don't have the access, I kind of steer away from the infrared blankets as much overall, but I think they're getting better as far as I can tell, but I don't have a good sense of which companies are doing the best ones right now. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Yeah.
For somebody doing the bath piece, anything you'd throw in the bath with them? Epsom salts, essential oils.
All those things are
my brain's always looking for ways to, get the most out of these different activities and hacks. So curious what you do. I know you're not specifically doing that, but for your patients.
Yeah, so I have some people do mud baths kind of things, and they do certain types of muds and clays that they like a lot. Sometimes we'll do that more for people that need a higher detox level, and that can help. And also, essential oils are good. I just try to avoid crappy chemicals is my biggest thing, right? So not like your bath bombs and fluffy kinds of things and smells and perfumes, and just avoiding those things are my mainstay for most people. But essential oils can be great. Lavender is great. Lavender is a great relaxing essential oil that people can use before bed. That can be very, very helpful. So I don't have a specific protocol there. It's really what people want to do, or where I feel like we could do a little bit of extra detox. Epsom salt's great too. You mentioned Epsom salts. So those are a great addition to the bath as well.
All right, we're going to get back to your night routine.
Yeah.
But while we're on water, I want to stick there.
Whenever you're ready, yeah.
How do you feel about hydrogen water for drinking and structuring water?
Good questions. So I was pretty skeptical, and I have to say I'm not entirely not unskeptical, or whatever the word is, about hydrogen water still. But I've had mixed experiences with it overall. I know what the research is supposed to show me, that it's really what it can be is sort of a detox or antioxidant kind of deal. I don't know exactly how that works, but I have found in people that have more inflammatory load, they tend to do relatively well with hydrogen water. I think it's not something you should be drinking all the time. I think you'd be taken more periodically. I don't use it a lot personally. I don't have a hydrogen water maker here at my house, but I think it can be used periodically, especially under more stress. And so it's one of the only other molecules that I know supposedly that redoxes like methylene blue does, interestingly enough, where it has the capacity to help you make energy and also has the capacity to help you detox as well. So I think there's something to it. And I do have some of my patients that do swear by it, that use it on a regular basis. I think the main thing is realizing as well that it's not always necessary to use it as an antioxidant. I think that the issue we come into a lot with supplementation, with these kinds of things, is that antioxidants aren't always something you want to just pound and pound and pound and pound, right? We want to be having a balance of things that are going to stress our system. And if you have too many things that are like an antioxidant around exercise, you're not going to see the benefits of exercise. So you shouldn't be drinking hydrogen water when you're strength training or when you're endurance training. Like, these are not things that are going to help your exercise, at least with the performance aspects of things after you exercise. Like, you want the hormetic stress of exercise to see the benefit. And so I think hydrogen in those cases is probably not a good idea. But if you're on an airplane and you want to have some hydrogen water, sure. If you're under a lot more stress, sure, you can do some hydrogen water, that capacity. When it comes to structured water, this is interesting. I think that my general sense here is that water that's mineralized in general is better than water that's not mineralized. Water that's structured is probably better than water that's not structured in general. But how you structure it and the way it's structured, there's so many variations in this right now. I mean, structured water, the best is what's coming out of the ground, right? Because what it's doing there is it's taking minerals from the rock. It's having the sort of vorticial flow that's happening because of being in streams and in that kind of setting. So I don't get crazy about it, is what it comes down to. I think if you want to vortex your water, you want to structure it, fine. If it makes you feel better, great. But most people aren't going to go there for what it comes down to. So if I can get them to mineralize their water, if I can get them to drink filtered water, like, that's kind of where I mostly focus my time. And
when it comes to minerals that you're adding back in, what's a good brand?
So I use like some sea minerals. I have a couple different, brands that I use. The Element company is okay. Overall, they have a pretty good variety of the minerals, but I try to do it where if you're going to drink mineral water, try to get it from the source if you can. So like mineralized water, so water that's coming from the ground, mineralized, is typically better. So your what's it called? Some of the brands that I use, the Gerolsteiner is one of them that I've used over the years. That's a good one. The Pellegrinos are pretty good. Those are remineralized, but they do have some natural minerals in them as well. And some sea salt minerals, there's a lot of companies that make them. You can get some of those pretty easily. So I'll have people use those. But in general, I really try to get people to think about not only minerals in their water, but minerals in their food and getting good sources of minerals in their diet as well. So, but in general, I will also use some mineral supplementation in people as well, especially if they're very low on the mineral content of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that could be from the companies that I mentioned. I use a lot of, they used to be called Claire. Now they're called something else. I think like SFI Health or something like that. It's another brand of supplements that I've used for many years that I like. So those are some ideas.
I think you mentioned Pellegrino. So you're a fan of the carbonated water as well?
So carbonation versus non-carbonation is another big question for people. I think I'm okay with carbonation for most people. However, I think you should vary it up. I don't think you should have just carbonated water on a daily basis. For me, I know if I drink carbonated water, I'm going to be peeing every hour. Because the carbonation itself has some sort of caustic effect on the bladder wall in some people, and I'm one of those people, and I'll be peeing a lot more than I would otherwise. So if you don't have that effect, I think you can drink it more often. There's some question as to whether you can be leaching some minerals from your bone using carbonation over long periods of time. There really haven't been any great studies that I've seen on that, but I think what I care about is people are drinking water in general. I think that if you're drinking carbonated water, that's what's going to make you drink, then drink it. If you're drinking still water and that's what's going to make you drink, then drink it. Because most people are dehydrated on a regular basis. They're not getting enough water on a regular basis. And it's a big issue, right? And so I don't like people having a lot of juice and a lot of soda, of course, and like things like that are not as hydrating and also have calories and other kinds of things that aren't very good for us. My kids, I don't think, have had like soda twice in their life, I think. But in general, hydration is really important. And if it's going to be carbonated or non-carbonated, I'm okay with it if you're going to get enough in on a daily basis. But if I have a preference, it's going to be more still water than carbonated, because I do feel like carbonated water is not as hydrating in general. People tend to urinate more after they drink it compared to still.
All right. And as somebody who is a fan of hydration, you're prioritizing it. How does somebody begin to figure out how much to drink in a day? Can they just rely on thirst, or do you like to go by a certain calculation?
Yeah, there's a good calculation. I don't have the numbers exactly on the top of my head. I think it's like 2.7 liters a day for women and 3.2 for men, but don't quote me exactly on that. Part of it depends on body weight. A lot of it depends on exercise and how much you're exercising. And so I use those as general calculations for people, depending on what their body weight is, what their exercise amount is overall. And then from there, you asked about thirst. Thirst is not a very good source of our needs for hydration overall, especially as we get older. As we get older, our thirst receptors go down, and our thirst receptor capacity is also interesting because it's one of our last signs of dehydration, actually, is thirst. Not one of the first. Some of the ones you'll get before that: headaches, muscle aches, cognition issues, fatigue. These are all happening from hydration oftentimes, actually. There's a book that my father made me read when I was maybe 12 years old, and it's called Your Body's Many Cries for Water. And it goes across all these issues as to why water is so important. Water is the main solution that carries our red blood cells, that carries the liquid of our bloodstream is made up of mostly water. We have water in our bloodstream, but about 60% of that water is actually in our cells and around our cells. So our body's about 60 to 70% water. I think it's about 60% water in total. And only about 20% of that water, if I'm not mistaken, is actually in our vascular system. The rest of that water, about 40% of it, is in our cells themselves, in our interstitial area. And so what happens is that people are drinking like caffeine or alcohol and other diuretics, things that are making us urinate. Like, your urine doesn't look yellow because you're leaching out water from your cellular system and your interstitial system. So it may look like you're not dehydrated, but you are, because you're taking all this water out of the system that didn't want to come out, right? Well, oftentimes we think of dehydration being yellow urine, yellow pee. But if you're drinking diuretics or having diuretics like your caffeines, your alcohols, energy drinks, or you're taking medications that are diuretics, you're not going to see that yellow urine. So yellow urine is not a great sign for everybody, especially if you're on those kinds of things. But it can be if you see that, if you're not on a diuretic or taking diuretic products like caffeine and alcohol. Having yellow urine can be a good sign that you're not getting enough hydration. But thirst is not the greatest. And the challenge is that most of us are not used to drinking straight water anymore. And so it's hard for people to drink enough water in a day. And it's a big issue as we get older.
All right, let's come back to the night routine. I think you're just about to jump into bed.
Yeah.
Take it from there.
So after the supplements and that aspect of things, I go up to my room. From there, it's usually brushing my teeth, right? And so if you're brushing your teeth, there's lots of different ways to brush your teeth these days. We can go in like a whole hour on teeth and hygiene as well. I have a lot of biological dentists that I work with, but in general, I brush my teeth. I have an electronic toothbrush. I use non-toxic toothpaste, no fluoride, nothing crappy in there, no titanium dioxide, nothing crazy like that. And I floss as well. Some sort of non-plastic floss, please. That's really important as well. And then from there, I will, all the lights are off in my room. By the way, I've been having yellow tinted lenses on all evening as well. So I haven't been I wear glasses, but I have yellow tinted glasses. I don't wear the fully orange ones typically, but I wear like the yellow tinted ones. And so I have that on, the lights are off. In my room, I have a sound machine. I have an air purifier. I have a face mask, and those are the main things. And so those are all ready for me. And so right before I get into bed, I'll typically do a light stretching type of routine. And this is another way to kind of just loosen things up and activate a little bit more that parasympathetic nervous system. And so if I'm at my home, that can be about 5 to 10 minutes of a routine. If I'm traveling, it might be as little as 2 to 5 minutes of a stretching routine overall. But what I find to be very helpful overall is actually something over your head to do. So what I mean by that is like arms over your head like this, like that I'm showing in the camera. So basically my arms are above my head, and do some stretching back and forth. And sometimes I'll do some certain things with my back as well. I've had some back issues over the years that have gotten better, but arms above your head, what that does is gravity brings all the blood flow back into your central vascular system, and that typically makes people feel much calmer overall. And it's a kind of a parasympathetic activator on its own. And so that's done. 5 to 10 minutes of stretching, and then I go into my bed with my blindfold on, with my mask, the sound machine's on, and my phone is on fully airplane mode as well. I do use it as an alarm, but there's no signal like going through it. And the funny thing that I do, this is kind of a funny quirk of mine, is that I use one earplug, not two. And I've done this for, oh God, like 20 something years now, since college, where when I was in college and I lived in a fraternity, I had a fan next to me so that I could go to bed, so that it was loud enough. And this is before sound machines, really. And then I only used one earplug because I had in the ear that was not on the pillow. I typically sleep on my side. We could talk about sleeping in sides and whatever, but side sleeping tends to be the most optimal position for most people to sleep. And so I'd always sleep with my left ear down and my right ear up. And so that if my alarm went off in the morning, I'd at least hear it because my left ear didn't have an earplug in it. And so this is how I could get to class in the morning. And so I've just kind of kept out that routine over the years for whatever reason. And so I have one earplug in, mask on my face, sound machine on. Obviously it's a cold room, it's a dark room, those kinds of things too.
Have you ever played with those mats that go on top of the mattress to cool the bed down?
So I haven't, but I have a lot of friends and colleagues and patients that have over the years, and most people across the board love it. In fact, it's been high in my mind this year as we approach, spring and summer here in Colorado. It can get hot in the summer sometimes, and I was thinking about it, but I haven't splurged for it because they can be very expensive overall, some of these sleep mats and things. So, but they can be very helpful for people to keep their body temperature down and have a nice kind of rise in the morning to wake you up rather than an alarm clock.
The other thing a lot of people use in the bed in our world is the grounding sheet, where you can get one that goes right at the foot of your bed. You can plug it in the grounding outlet of your wall or out the window and right into the ground. Have you played with that?
I haven't, but I'm concerned about dirty electricity a lot of times, so plugging it in the outlet. So I don't typically recommend patients do that, but if they have the capacity to do the outside into the ground thing, that's optimal. I've been playing around with that idea this summer as well as to doing the grounding mats and things. The other thing I've been playing around with, especially in my patients that have more EMFs around them. I live in Colorado, so it's not too bad where I live, is actually, Faraday cage is actually going into some EMF protection in your bed itself so that you're protected from everything when you're sleeping. And I mean, it's across the board that people that do this feel so much better, even if they don't think that they're sensitive to EMFs. If you live in like New York City or like apartments everywhere around you and getting Wi-Fi and 5G or whatever, like I think it could be very, very helpful in those capacities. So I don't think I could probably convince my wife to do that overall, to have a Faraday cage on the bed, but grounding's in my world, what I've been thinking about recently is actually in the order that you just described them, is something for the bed to cool the bed, and then the next would be grounding, and after that would be potentially a Faraday. That's not going to happen in my house anytime soon. But the big thing about your sleep environment though is, do you sleep by yourself? Do you sleep with a spouse or a partner? If your partner is snoring, if your partner moves a lot and kicks you in the face, I promise you this is not the greatest sleep environment for you. And so this is why. Have you heard of sleep divorces before?
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Sleeping in different beds or different bedrooms.
So this is becoming much more common. It's still kind of passé, kind of not talked about a lot, but about 50% of US households, the spouses sleep in different beds now. And this sounds like a bad thing, and then my wife would tell you it would be a bad thing, right? Because no, and I've talked to other women as well that like sleeping in bed with your partner is really important, and that there is something to that. I do think. However, if your partner is snoring, they've done studies showing that even if you don't think that you're waking up when your partner is snoring, your cortisol, your stress hormones going up every time they snore, and so you're not going to get optimal sleep if you're not getting good sleep, even if you think you are, right? So then, of course, you can measure your sleep. And this is something that, of course, many of us do in our world, and which is what I do in mine. And then you can start, this is the routine that I've dialed in over many years, using something like the Aura Ring to help me understand, okay, when I do this, this is what happens. When I do that, right? So if I take Trocom, what does it do to my sleep? If I take the cordycepin, what does it do? The Troimmune. If I don't go in my sauna, what happens? If I eat later, one thing I was playing around for a little while with Jesse was doing a tablespoon of honey before I went to bed. Like, does this help my sleep? And I found that if I was super stressed that day, it did actually. But if I wasn't, then it didn't. And so then sometimes I'll add in like a tablespoon of honey in the evenings as well as a result of that. But this is how you can kind of play with things over time and see. And so always working, always optimizing as we always are, but always trying to understand that using data can be very helpful here. And this is how I've figured out and kind of streamlined my routine over the years.
As you talk about that honey piece, it gets me thinking about something I want to come back to. The fact you're taking collagen in these different supplements in what it sounds like would be a lot of people's fasting window. So what I'm leading to here, how do you think about fasting? Obviously, you're not totally stressed about having no calories or nothing right before bed, but how do you look at that period at night before bed? And then when do you break your fast?
Yeah. So when fasting came on the scene heavy about 5 or 6 years ago, I was all over it like everybody else was at the time. But what I realized very quickly personally, and for a lot of my patients, is that they were not getting enough calories in during the day. And they were starting to lose muscle mass, lean body mass as a result of it. So you had these people, and I was one of those, is that my lean body mass started going down pretty significantly. And I found that long time. So I think there's different types of fast, right? There's intermittent fasting, there's 48-hour fast, 72-hour fast, 5-day fast, or all these different types of things. And so in general, I do think that periodic fasting can be very helpful, but I don't think that we should be doing this all the time for most of us overall. I think it could be a great reset for people when they're on their journey. And this was a great reset for me initially from a cognitive perspective. Actually, my first 72-hour fast was this sort of awakening moment for me. I was like, holy crap, my brain can feel this way. Like, this is amazing after 3 days of not eating. And so I think and we know the benefits of about a 72-hour fast overall. This is great, but I don't think people should be fasting as much as maybe people think they should be fasting, is what it comes down to. And I also used to think that skipping breakfast wasn't a big deal, and that people can start eating at 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, have their feeding or eating windows between like 12 and 6 or 8 o'clock. But in general, we are more insulin sensitive in the morning when we wake up. And so what I found over the years is it's better to have maybe a meal in the morning and then not eat until dinner, kind of deal. So instead of having multiple meals during the day overall. And so personally for me, I will eat less during the day overall. I'll have a bigger dinner and I'll have a breakfast, but sometimes I'll have not a big breakfast, but depending on the day. But in general, I think we've kind of like everything else in like these kinds of worlds, people overdo it, right? And I saw this happening over and over again. So for me, I do periodic fasts. I'll do like every quarter, I'll do a 72-hour fast. And that's, it's good for the brain as a way of remembering that you don't have to eat all the time. And it's obviously good from a recycling autophagy and recycling the immune system and the gut and everything else like that. But from an intermittent fasting perspective, what I recommend for most of my people, my clients these days and personally, is having a good breakfast, but trying to finish dinner relatively early as well. And so you don't have to have your breakfast immediately when you wake up. Sometimes we'll do, fasting cardio in the morning, even fasting, lifting weights can be helpful in some people, depending on the person. Like, it's very individualized, right? Depending on the person overall. But yes, I'm having some very, very small amount of calories at night, like if I'm having a little bit of collagen overall. And then the honey piece is great for people that have really overstressed, sympathetic overstressed as well, because, or they have an issue with their blood sugar dropping in the middle of the night. The problem I found also with fasting is that if people weren't eating, and especially if they're doing a ketogenic diet at the same time or very low carb, is that they weren't getting enough carbohydrates at night, and their sleep was suffering pretty dramatically as a result of that. So in those people, I was convincing them to have like a little bit of a tablespoon of honey at night just to help them sleep, because it's also another way that the body is going to go into more of a parasympathetic mode. So I don't mean to make this complicated for people, but I don't think there's a one size fits all, in the sense that I think some people do great with intermittent fasting and having an eating window from 12 to 8 o'clock every day, or 12 to 6 o'clock every day, whatever it might be. But I find that overall, over the long term, that's not the greatest for most people. But when they're first starting their journey, like for example, if like they're just starting to work on their diet, that's actually a great way to do it. It's a great way to say, hey, you know what? Don't eat breakfast. Just eat from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day, because it's very difficult for them oftentimes to get as many calories in at that time. And then they start dropping weight pretty easily initially. And then we start optimizing their diet and their lifestyle, their behaviors. And that's when I typically shift them to having more of a breakfast, having an earlier dinner, and then the breakfast doesn't have to be immediately when they wake up, but they're having more of a window, maybe around 6 p.m. until maybe 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning when they're actually having their breakfast, that kind of thing, right? Not having it at 5 o'clock in the morning or something when they wake up. So I think I probably made that complicated for people, but there's lots of nuances there.
No, that was great. And I think your journey with intermittent fasting and the way you look at it is very similar to mine. And I love that you brought the individual aspect in and beginning of the journey for people, because we are in a world today where 90+% of people are metabolically unhealthy, often overweight. So if you're in that boat and you're coming to this conversation, intermittent fasting, along with low carb or keto, along with potentially restricting calories, are your power tools.
100%. Yeah.
For somebody like me or you who's been in this world a long time and we maintain a regular body weight, it just makes sense we're going to have that evolution, a way of looking at it. So I love the way you actually got into the nuance there and brought that all together.
The big thing I found in patients and personally was lean body mass. Like if you're losing muscle, this is not a good thing. Especially as we get older, it's harder to put muscle back on. And there's something called sarcopenia, which is the losing muscle as we get older. And you have a much higher risk of having an injury if you have less muscle on you. So there's been a big shift in the health and wellness community over the last several years. I'm sure you know about protein being king, right? And protein. We need to have more protein in general. And like everything else, there should be probably more of a balance than we talk about. But I do realize that protein is an issue for many, many people. And many of us are not getting enough protein in on a day-to-day basis. And as we get older, it gets more important because our protein requirements go up as we get older to maintain a certain lean body mass overall. So my overall shift has been less fasting, higher on the protein, increasing resistance and muscle growth, lean body mass. I don't think you need to be gigantic. I don't think you need to have gigantic muscles. And this could be, there's a potential over time that this could be even more detrimental, I think, because you have all this muscle mass. And if you don't maintain it, what's going to happen to it, right? And so I think that there's a sweet spot there. And that's always a challenge for people, right? Because it's, I just want to have huge muscles. I just want to be lean and be able to run marathons. We're a society of extremes, as you know, Jesse, and the real deal is going back to the basics and the foundation as much as you can. And then if you also, the big piece for me is, well, show me the money, show me what's going on in your data, what's going on with your laboratory analysis, how well optimized are your cells? Can you make energy effectively? Are you detoxing from the energy that you're making well? How is your gut doing? How are your hormones? And it's not that I don't care what you're eating, but I do care what's happening in your cells, because that's what I do as a clinician. As I go back to cellular medicine, I optimize what's going on there. And then from understanding what's going on in the cells, you can get a sense from what people are doing, how they need to modulate and modify over time. And like I've seen these trends, and when I was looking at, when the ketogenic diet came out and I was checking people's stool analysis, everybody was just shitting out fat, right? Because too much fat in the diet, what's going to happen is that you're not going to be able to process all that fat. You're going to be pooping it out. And if your poop is floating on a regular basis, that means you have a lot of fat in your stool. And so what do I have to do? I had to tell people either come down on the fat in their eating or start taking more digestive enzymes to break down the fat that they're eating overall. And so depending on the person, depending on the situation, we do what we have to do to optimize that. But if you have a lot of fat getting into your large intestine, you're going to start getting bacterial overgrowth and things that you don't want in there, and getting more flatulence and, clearing out rooms when you fart, that kind of thing. And so that happens with protein too. Protein farts are a real thing. Everybody listening, many people have heard about protein farts, right? Like this is the thing. Like if you have too much protein and you're not digesting it well, you're going to get protein products in your stool. And that's also going to cause issues with bacterial overgrowth and other kinds of things too. So the key with all of these things is couch what you're doing in the data that you're collecting and seeing how things work over time. And this is what I do in clinical practice when I work with patients, because that's how you get a feel for what's actually working, what might be when you're overshooting and undershooting and, things like that.
I want to make sure we come back to food before we part ways, but let's come back to your day. You set
Okay.
us up to the point of going to sleep. Let's say you had, well, actually, you tell me what's an ideal number of hours of quality sleep for you? And then what do you do when you wake up?
Ideally for me, I get 7 hours of sleep. If I sleep more than that, I feel tired. I can get 6.5 to 7, and that's usually a good range for me. But typically 7 is where I like to be. And so 7 hours of sleep, I wake up in the morning. I mean, I have 4 children here at my house, and I'm not necessarily an early riser. So I'm not going to lie to people listening and tell you I have this amazing morning routine. I don't. Okay. My routine in the morning is very, very short. It's typically taking 5 to 30 seconds in my bed, trying to set my intentions for the day, set my grounding for the day. And then from there, getting up and getting all my children ready for the day. Okay. And so that could be, and that usually is about an hour and a half or so. Within that time frame, what I'm trying to do, if I have time in the morning before everybody wakes up, I'll go down to my basement where I have my red light panel and I have my sunlight. I have a Spurdy lamp, and I'll spend 5 minutes in front of my Spurdy, which is your UVB, right? And so you're getting your UV from the sun, especially in places like you live and I live in the wintertime. It's important to get your UV light. And so I do that for about 5 minutes. I typically do a meditation while I'm in front of my lamp, if I can. Usually it's a 5-minute meditation because it's 5 minutes in front of the lamp. And so 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes front, 2.5 minutes in the back. And then usually making breakfast for my kids, which can be any number of things. I'm not a stickler when it comes to no carbohydrates for them in the morning. They can have like a clean cereal, some eggs, some fruit, some other things like that, some vitamins. For me, it depends on the morning, but usually in mornings where I have a lot to do, it's usually going to be some sort of shake kind of thing. And that's going to be usually protein, some greens, some creatine, and then my battery of supplements that I'm going to take in the morning that are focused on the day at hand, but focused on mostly what I need because I've measured my data over time. And I can go into those if you want. But one of the main ones I take on a big day is going to be my methylene blue for sure.
Okay, let's start there. Are you taking that with the shake, before the shake? You didn't mention hydration. Are you hydrating as soon as you get up?
Yeah, so I have hydration in the morning. That's typically, obviously the hydration is going to be part of my shake as well. That's going to be with water. But then so my main things is usually hydration with a shake and then a hydration with something like this big glass of like a big mason jar of water. This is water with lemon in it and ice. That's it. That's what I'll typically be drinking in the morning. And then the methylene blue is usually as part of my shake. I take everything at the same time. I'm just not I don't have the time to think about waiting a half hour to do certain things in general. So the methylene blue is one of my mainstays on a regular basis overall, but especially when I have a big day, I'll be using more of that in the morning to help power me and give me extra energy, give more cellular support overall. Yeah.
Okay, so let's be clear with the methylene blue piece.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're having it every day. You're upping the dose on a day when you need to perform. Let's talk about the different dosages there.
Yeah, so methylene blue, the doses that I use are relatively low already. So what we developed is something called Just Blue, which is 16 milligrams of methylene blue at our company. And 16 is a very low dose overall. If you look at most of the studies out there, methylene blue has been around a long, long time. A lot of the research is around 1 milligram per kilogram, which ends up being about 50 to 70 milligrams at a dose. But a lot of the additional data out there that's come out in the last several decades is more focused on neurocognitive optimization and mitochondrial optimization. And that's more 4, 8, 12, 16, maybe 25 milligrams of methylene blue. And so, the cool thing about methylene blue is it works, as I mentioned earlier, as a redox cycler. So what it means is that it can help with energy production, ATP production. but it can also work as a detoxifier as well. It can help as an antioxidant. It also recycles NAD and FAD, which go back and help you make more energy. And so if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, especially in 94% of the US population has some element of mitochondrial dysfunction, then methylene blue can be potentially helpful as a result. Now, it's not the only thing you want to do, obviously, but it could be something that can be very helpful as a result of being able to compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction. And so mitochondria, I guess just a minute on that, like there are, when we learned about mitochondria in school, we learned that we had a cell that had a nucleus, had cytoplasm, Golgi bodies, endoplasmic reticulum, and it had a mitochondria. So that's wrong, right? So some cells in our body have one, but most of our cells have many more than that, especially ones that are highly metabolic. Some fun trivia for you, Jesse. Do you know how the type of tissue or the cell in our body that has the most mitochondria per cell?
I know it because I've heard you say it on another show.
There
Ovaries
you go. So,
and sperm.
yes. So your gonads. So your ovaries and sperm have the highest amount of mitochondria per cell. Then behind that is your brain, your liver, your heart, and your musculoskeletal tissue. So your musculoskeletal tissue the muscles themselves have the most mitochondria per cell in reserve overall. And because if you need to be chased, or you're going to be chased, like you need to be able to get up and move and use those muscles as fast and as efficiently as possible. So the challenge is that if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you have issues with fertility, you have brain fog, concentration issues, you have cardiac issues, liver detox issues, exercise-induced fatigue, all these things. And so working on mitochondrial function is so important. Knowing the reason why you have mitochondrial dysfunction is also very important. These are things like infections and toxins in our environment and medications, and insulin resistance actually is the biggest reason why we have mitochondrial dysfunction overall. But in essence, what methylene blue can do is compensate for that mitochondrial issue and reboot, regenerate, and optimize it. And so for me, on a regular basis, I take a small amount, maybe about 4 milligrams, sometimes once a day, sometimes twice a day. But when I'm under more stress, I will take more, anywhere between 8 to 16 milligrams. And usually that's 8 to 16 milligrams in a full day, sometimes more than that, but not usually more than that. And what I find that does is it just raises the capacity for me to make energy more efficiently. And then it doesn't make you feel stimulated. It doesn't make you feel like you're on caffeine per se. And I don't drink caffeine in the morning, by the way, most of the time. And so for me, I don't need that stimulation as much. I tend to be already sort of more naturally sympathetic in the morning, if that's kind of how I operate. And so what I find what I need is just more of an elevation in my capacity, my brain capacity, my memory, my cognition. And so methylene blue could do a really good job of that. And so sometimes though, on a bigger day, so I'll take the methylene blue and that'll be helpful, somewhere between 8 to 16 milligrams, depending on the day. But I'll also add a quarter of a troche of something else called blue canatine. And blue canatine is a combination of methylene blue, very low dose, just 5 milligrams in a full troche, then nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. And so this is a great combination for me. I stopped drinking coffee, I think it was 2019. And I stopped drinking it because I started getting headaches. And I didn't realize that it was the coffee that was doing it. I thought I needed to drink more coffee, of course. And then I was like, oh, I just need more. And then I drink more coffee and get better and worse headaches, that kind of thing. And so I stopped drinking coffee. But I do like a little bit of caffeine, a small amount. So like in a full blue canatine troche, which is the delivery device we use, it's about 50 milligrams of caffeine, which is a quarter cup of coffee equivalent. So I take 1/4 of a full troche, which is 1/4 of 50 milligrams, whatever that is. It's not a lot. And then that's with 1 milligram of nicotine in a full troche, just 0.25 in a quarter of a troche. And I find just that little bit there really does a fantastic job at just kind of turning my brain on just a little bit more, along with the higher amount of methylene blue that I'm taking for the day. And I use the higher methylene blue when I'm stressed, like when I'm traveling, or I feel like something like I'm getting sick. I'll use a higher dose of that as well, because it also at higher doses can have an antimicrobial effect as well. And so, but for me, it's usually on a bigger mentally cognitive day. It's going to be usually 8 milligrams of methylene blue pure, along with a quarter of the blue canatine. And then I have my shake, as I mentioned, there was a little bit of creatine in it. Typically that's about 3 to 5 grams of creatine. But on a bigger day or on a day that I didn't sleep as well, I might take as much as 15 or 20 grams of it. There are some studies that show recently that it can improve cognitive performance and kind of mitigate if you've had any sleep issues the night before. The green powders change over the years. It depends on the situation. Right now, when I'm using I think it's called Super Greens or something like that. It's something I get locally that I like. That's kind of the base of it. And then sometimes I'll add some cacao powder as well, some chocolate as well. I don't drink caffeine, as I said, but the coffee has some natural caffeine, a little bit in there. Excuse me, chocolate has a little bit of caffeine in it naturally, so I have a little bit of that as well. What else goes in there sometimes? Sometimes I'll add some turmeric powder, but I haven't been doing that recently. Those are the main ones that go in there, and then the protein powder itself as well.
So just to be clear, with the methylene blue, are you ever taking a day off, or are you always having at least a little bit?
I take days off. I often take off on the weekends as well, depending on what I'm going to do. Because if I'm doing more endurance training, methylene blue is fantastic for endurance training because it can act just like oxygen in your cells. So your aerobic capacity, your capacity to make energy from your mitochondria increases as a result of taking it. And so I have a lot of my endurance athletes that I work with will take it, and they'll notice that their heart rate can stay up longer doing endurance work before they have to slow down. And I have a couple of patients that refuse to work out without it because it increases their heart rate for longer. I worked with a guy recently, about 3 months ago now. He ran something called the Leadville Race, which is an ultra marathon here in Colorado. It's 100 miles of running in the mountains of Colorado. It's legit. And so he was able to shave off, I think it was 3 hours of his time using methylene blue. I was giving him 32 milligrams of methylene blue every 4 hours, along with the blue canatine as well. And so that's a lot of methylene blue, but he was also going for a very long distance. And so he shaved off a decent amount of time that way. So, but even your sort of regular endurance athlete kinds of people can benefit in that capacity. And so I use it that way. So sometimes on the weekends I'll take off, but if I'm doing more of like a longer endurance kind of thing, I'll use the methylene blue along with it to improve overall the endurance. And I can see the benefit overall with heart rate, with recovery as well.
For somebody brand new to methylene blue, give a brief history when it came onto the scene and then its evolution to now.
So methylene blue has been around for a long, long time. It was synthesized as a textile dye back in the 1870s. So it's a synthetic ingredient. Yes, everybody, it's a synthetic ingredient. It doesn't mean that everything synthetic is bad for you. We live in a synthetic world, lighting, food, toxic environments. And so sometimes we need some synthetic things to help us, okay? Just like everything that's natural for us, natural is not good for us. I've seen this on multiple occasions. People foraging for the wrong mushrooms, for example, ending up dying of liver failure. So be careful what you think is just natural is going to be good for you. So it's an important conversation to have because people in our space don't like to think about taking things that are synthetic per se. But methylene blue is designed as a synthetic dye, and then somehow they figured out that it treated malaria. And they were testing a class of dyes at the time that are called thiazine dyes, looking for ways to work on various types of microbes. And what they found is that you could give very, very high doses of methylene blue. It would kill pathogens, but at the same time, it would not have a detrimental effect on the human host itself. And this is why it got called at that time a magic bullet, because you could give these high doses of methylene blue, kill bugs, but not harm the human host. And in 1897, it became the first drug registered with our FDA. It was a new FDA at the time. And from about that time until the 1950s, it was really the primary or one of the primary antimicrobials available. And it was given at high doses. We're talking about 1 milligram per kilogram or higher for most infections. And we're using it those doses now for infections again. For equivalence, this is about 70 milligrams to 150 milligrams of methylene blue per dose to see the antimicrobial effects of methylene blue, okay? And so in the 1950s, when penicillin and other things came around, methylene blue became less exciting to use, especially because it had a very blue side effect, making your urine very, very blue. And so people didn't like that, especially at higher doses. It can make other secretions very, very blue as well, like your poop or your tears and things like that. So, but this is at very, very high doses, like 2 milligrams per kilogram kind of thing, like 150 milligrams or higher of methylene blue. So in the 1950s, it became fish tank cleaner. So that's why people know methylene blue as fish tank cleaner. And so if you go to a fish tank store and you want a fish tank cleaner, it's going to have methylene blue in it. The problem with that fish tank cleaner, with the methylene blue in it. It's also contaminated with things like heavy metals, like your lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. So you don't want to be getting your methylene blue from that source. That's a whole different ball of wax in the sense of even pharmaceutical grade methylene blue sources that you might find online can still be contaminated with heavy metals. So you have to be very, very careful at what you can find, but certainly you don't want to be drinking fish tank cleaner overall. And so methylene blue also became a drug that was used in psychotherapy, in psychiatry, because there are some qualities of it. It's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And MAOI means that what that means is that it prevents the breakdown of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in the synapse. So it has mood boosting capacity itself. The first antipsychotic was derived from methylene blue, and methylene blue itself has been studied in depression, in bipolar, and seeing significant benefits from a mental health perspective. But it does increase those neurotransmitters, so it's something you have to be aware of overall. And so if you were in a lab in chemistry any time in your life, you may have used methylene blue, because methylene blue, what it does is it concentrates in the cells in the mitochondria. And so you can look under a microscope and see the mitochondria in your cell if you've given the cell methylene blue, because it's going to concentrate there. And so this is how we figured out that something was happening in the mitochondria when methylene blue is being administered. And methylene blue is actually still on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications. And it's for two different things. One is called methemoglobinemia, which is a condition where you cannot carry oxygen on your red blood cells. Methylene blue can help carry oxygen better by changing the redox status of iron. And then it also is on the list for cyanide poisoning. Cyanide poisoning is rare, thankfully, but cyanide destroys actually one of the complexes on the mitochondria that helps you make energy. And what methylene blue can do is it can help compensate for that in various really cool maneuvers to help you continue to allow yourself some energy production while the cyanide's around. So that's why it's an antidote for that. So we know now over the last several decades that it's a fantastic mitochondrial enhancer, and it does it in this redox way, which it helps it enhance energy production by ATP production, by compensating for any issues that you have on the ATP production cycle, which there can be many. And then it also helps as a detoxifier because it can directly neutralize reactive oxygen species as well. At slightly higher doses, it actually increases your glutathione production. And then that also has an antioxidant impact significantly as well.
Given what you shared there about its impact on neurotransmitters in the brain, somebody on psych meds, is this totally contraindicated for them to use methylene blue, or do they just have to be careful with dosages?
So if you're on medication that is like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, SSRIs, like if you're on them for depression, if you're on an SNRI or serotonin norepinephrine reuptake, these are kind of the newer class of antidepressants. And most antipsychotic drugs are also working on the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine system in various ways, depending on the drug. You have to be very careful taking methylene blue. Not so much that I think you have a risk of something called serotonin syndrome, which is the most rare complication if you have a lot of serotonin around. If you're not taking IV methylene blue. IV methylene blue with these drugs is unsafe and should not be used unless you have a significant clinical guidance. If you're on one of those drugs, an antipsychotic, antidepressant, you can use methylene blue, but I always recommend doing it with a healthcare practitioner, working very slowly with your dosing. The risk is not serotonin syndrome. It's never been reported with oral methylene blue causing this, but the risk is that you might not feel very good if you have too much serotonin around, norepinephrine, dopamine that you're not used to. So this is also in patients that have Parkinson's, for example. There are actually some studies on methylene blue for Parkinson's patients and Alzheimer's and seeing improvements, but Parkinson's, usually you're on drugs that are increasing dopamine overall. And then as a result of that, there could be an interaction there because you're increasing dopamine with methylene blue. So if you're on medications in general, you always want to be careful when you're starting supplements and things like that. But certainly supplements that are dopaminergic, serotonergic, increased norepinephrine, these are things that you'd want to be more mindful and work with a practitioner closely if you're going to start methylene blue. On the other side of it, I have practitioners, psychiatrists that I work with that have been able to wean their patients off of the SSRIs of the world and use methylene blue instead, actually. And we know that depression is not a serotonin deficiency these days. That's been well described. So what I mean by that is that when you're taking an SSRI, you're not using it to work on a serotonin deficiency. You're using it to increase serotonin levels artificially to help you feel better. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you need it. but it doesn't work immediately. And we know that in essence, that's not the root cause of why you're depressed. And so methylene blue can be helpful because it's working on all these neurotransmitters at the same time. But even better is actually working on the GABA system as well, because the GABA system is probably more involved in depression, anxiety than we give it credit for overall if you're GABA depleted overall.
Okay, coming back to your routine.
Yeah.
You take your methylene blue in the morning,
Yeah.
but it sounds like depending on the day, you'll take it later in the day as well.
Sometimes.
Certain days, depending on if you're performing or how you're feeling. What about MB and sleep in the combo? For somebody that takes it, say, after dinner, is that something you ever do? And how does that impact sleep?
So I usually don't recommend starting methylene blue in the evenings or later in the afternoon, because some people, because of the way it's working, energy production, some of the monoamine oxidase aspect of things, oftentimes will feel more energized. They don't feel stimulated, but they feel more elevated. So some people find that if they take it too close to sleep, they'll have a hard time going to bed as a result of that. Some people, though, will actually take it before they go to bed and sleep better when they have methylene blue around. This is because sleep is obviously highly metabolic as well. It's not like we're sleeping and everything's stopped. Especially REM sleep is highly metabolic. And so you can find that some people will sleep better. For whatever reason, I've had a number of people tell me that they have much better bowel movements in the morning after having methylene blue when they go to bed at night. And so I've done it over the years, especially if I don't feel well. I'm thinking that, working on methylene blue is, in general, when you feel worse, your body can take higher doses of things because you're not going to be as sensitive to them. Your body's utilizing them in other ways. So sometimes I've done that, but in general, I use methylene blue. Usually if I'm going to take it twice a day, it's going to be at 8 o'clock in the morning or earlier, and it's going to be at maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that kind of thing, as a secondary dose. Oftentimes what I'll do in patients is that I'll give them maybe the blue canatine in the morning, like the one with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD, and then I'll have them take in like early afternoon, have them take the just blue, the pure methylene blue, as a way to kind of maintain some of that energy and some of that focus without having the stimulation overall. So, but yeah, in general, like on a regular basis, maybe 5 days a week, I'm taking about a quarter, once to twice a day, typically twice a day if I can get that second dose in there. And then on the days that I need to perform more, I'll take half of the Just Blue, so 8 milligrams, and a quarter of the blue canatine, and then I'll have my regular supplements in the morning as well, included in that. So
one of the cool things about taking MB is that you do feel it right away, or at least I did, and even on very low dose, like the Just Blue, having a quarter one of those, I'll feel it within like 10 minutes. The energy you have, the clarity, it's amazing. What I'm curious about is you talk about some of these higher doses. It sounds like those are reserved for infections and things like that, because I know the whole physiology changes when you go to those higher doses. But what does that feel like mentally? Because you feel it on such a low dose. Does it just keep getting more and more escalated, that energy and that calmness and focus in the brain? And what's the most you've ever taken, and what did that feel like?
The real thing here is that it depends on why you're taking it. In general, for mitochondrial optimization, you do not need high doses. 4, 8, 12, 16 milligrams up to 25 milligrams. For more of an acute issue, I will give higher doses very quickly in people. So if they have acute trauma, acute low oxygen state, acute infection, I can give 1 milligram to 2 milligrams per kilogram, and people tolerate those doses very well. In general, the system is much more inflamed, much more stressed, and you don't have really any major issues that I've seen when it comes to like some of the things that you might see if you were using those doses without being an acute issue. So like, for example, if you have a chronic issue, like if you have a chronic infection, for example, and you gave a very high dose, that may not feel very good. It may not feel very good right away because you might have detox symptoms, you might get headaches, you might feel like your brain is just really strange. And this is actually something that's been reported to me from people that have taken high doses without titrating their dose. So in general, if you have a chronic issue, the best thing to do is always titrate your dose. You don't want to start off at 50, 70, 100 milligrams of methylene blue. It's not a good idea in general, because you may not feel very good if you do it. So what I always do is that if it's a chronic issue, I slowly titrate the dose. And I titrate from 4, 8 milligrams, increasing the dose every 3 to 5 hours, 3 to 5 days, until they start feeling better. And when they find the dose that's working for them, then we stay on that dose. Now, it depends on what the situation is, though. If it's more of a mitochondrial issue, we can usually get away with lower doses. But if it's more of a like chronic infection, for example, we may need to get to 25, 50 milligrams of methylene blue maybe twice daily. And to do that, you go slowly so that you see the mitochondrial benefits early, and then you go up to the higher doses and you start seeing the anti-infective capacity of it. And so like all my patients have the higher strength methylene blue in their medicine cabinet in case they need it. And what does that mean? If they have an acute infection, if they have like acute low oxygen state, so God forbid, like a stroke or traumatic brain injury or a severe injury, there is good data, at least in animals, that methylene blue can rescue mitochondrial function and improve outcomes in animals if you give it early. And so it doesn't make it so that you don't go to the hospital or you don't get treated for whatever's going on, of course, but it can be an additional support to that whole process overall. And so, but that's only for acute things. Like if it's in, so a good example of this is my mom. Okay. So my mom she got bitten by a tick. She lives in New York. And so she had a significant inflammatory response on her leg, and she had never tried methylene blue before. Okay. And I was like, you need to take 150 milligrams of methylene blue right now. And she's like, it's 5:00 in the afternoon. You've told me about methylene blue. It can make you more awake and active and things. I'm like, it's not going to matter. You're going to sleep great. And so she took 150 milligrams of methylene blue. She slept great, had no problem sleeping. But if I had taken 150 milligrams of methylene blue at 5:00 tonight, and I don't have like an inflammatory response going on, I'm not going to feel very good. So, and I know this from my own personal experience, which you asked me, is that, and so for me, if you have an acute issue, you can tolerate much higher doses of it, what it comes down to. If you have more of a chronic issue, or you're like especially if it's mitochondrial, you want to start off at low doses. And then if it's a chronic infection, then maybe, you want to be titrating your doses to higher amounts. That's going to be more anti-infective overall.
Okay, coming back to you. What's the most you've taken at once?
The most I've taken it once is when I had COVID. I took 150 milligrams and I tolerated it like a champ, no problems at all. A friend of mine, a colleague that works in the company, he took a gram, like 1 full gram of methylene blue. And I've had a couple people report to me that they'd taken that much and they felt fine. But I don't recommend taking that kind of dosing very often, right? Because when you get to really high doses of methylene blue, instead of it becoming more of a redox cycler where it enhances energy production and detoxification, instead of that, it actually becomes a stress on the system and can cause more issues. Some of the issues that it actually reverses, like hemoglobinemia, it actually can cause it at those higher doses.
And you've been clear that it depends on health status, if there's an infection, how it'll react in the body. But in a general sense, somebody who isn't sick, and again, coming back to the way I described the energy, the focus, how much of a dosage can you keep increasing and keep seeing that go up typically? When would you hit a peak with the mental benefit that I was talking about there? If you're feeling good for like an interview like this or performing on stage.
Yeah, I find that people find their sort of max level somewhere between 16 to 25 milligrams is usually the most people will need. After that, they start feeling a little jittery, like a little bit more funky, like it doesn't feel as good. But some people, it's even lower than that. Some people, it's 8 milligrams and they feel crappier when they go to 12 and a half or 16. So the range is anywhere between 8 to 25 milligrams, I found.
Okay, we're running out of time here. A couple more things I want to make sure we hit on. The light interaction with methylene blue. And this is something, if you Google methylene blue, it'll be one of the first things that come up. The fact that when there's certain light hitting the skin, it'll actually enhance the way the methylene blue works. So talk about the physiology there.
Yeah.
And then basically what I want to make sure we parse out is that exponential boost we get from doing that basically the same as taking more of it, or is there something different that happens?
It's a good question. It would be hard to, it's kind of like an apples and oranges kind of thing, I think, a little bit there. But when it comes down to the synergy, methylene blue can donate electrons to part of your electron transport chain called complex 4. And that's the final protein that's responsible for the flow of electrons through. And then after electrons go through complex 4, they go down into the inner mitochondrial membrane and they get neutralized by oxygen. That's why we need oxygen. That's why oxygen is the final electron acceptor. Near infrared light, which we spoke about earlier, about 680 nanometers or so, that light spectrum has been shown to donate photonic energy, photonic light wavelength energy to complex 4 as well, to help with the flow of electrons through it as well. So they're synergistic in the sense that they both are allowing improved electron flow through complex 4, and likely also regenerating and optimizing that particular complex called cytochrome oxidase as well. So that's why when you take your methylene blue and then 30 to 45 minutes later go outside and get some sunlight or go in front of your near infrared light panels, you will feel this boost. You will feel this energetic boost. It's like a lift. It's not subtle if you get to the right dose of both of these. And it's like it's really a great combination. You feel more energy, you feel more focus, you feel lifted, etc. When it comes to, does it feel like you are on a higher dose of methylene blue by combining them? That's hard to know. Like everybody's gonna be a little bit different there. I think that it's an apples to oranges comparison. I would say that it's a bit different. Personally for me, taking a higher dose of methylene blue feels, it's less like I want to go outside and do something really, like I think there's more of like an energetic shift with the light than there is with increasing the methylene blue on its own. Like there's more like I can't sit still, like I want to go do something kind of feel with the light compared with the methylene blue compared to just an increased amount of methylene blue on its own. So it's almost like there's almost more of like a surge of there. It's almost like a heat kind of thing. And I think part of that is the heat response of the light itself, even though it's not a huge amount of heat. Like an example here is that I almost gave myself heat stroke when I combined methylene blue with 110 degree heat outside. I didn't realize I've done 110 degree heat before and been fine, and I was well hydrated, but I was making so much energy combining these two things together that I was putting off so much more heat that I almost gave myself heat stroke, and I had to cover myself in ice. It was an entertaining sight. But so that's something that I kind of found that may be slightly different in comparing the two.
Okay. Again, as we wrap up, a few more things I want to hit on, and I'm going to put them all on your plate and let you organically work through them.
Okay.
One being the rest of the ingredients in the smoothie, if you haven't covered those, your diet, and maybe you can take us through lunch and dinner, and then any other supplements, and even ones out of the nootropic realm. Things like fish oil and different things you might add to the diet to, give yourself a boost.
Okay, so in the smoothie, that's pretty much what I add. When it comes to my diet, it's typically more, more on the lower carb, higher protein, moderate fat kind of thing in general. And I do have more carbohydrates for dinner than I will have throughout the day. I typically don't eat lunch. If I do have any snacks, it's usually going to be a small amount of nuts, like some cashews or something like that. Not a lot, but I've been more gravitating on days when I don't have a recording or a big day like today, actually, I'll have a bigger breakfast. I'll typically have a higher protein breakfast. I won't have my shake actually in the morning with the protein. I'll take the protein out and I'll have actual protein. Like I'll have smoked salmon, I'll have some lean meat, I'll even do cold cuts if I need to, depending on the day. And then I'll have a good, like fermented, like sauerkraut, pickles. I like something fermented in the morning if I can as well. Dinners are, so lunches I don't typically have is what it comes down to. I've kind of taken those out of my diet for the most part. If I get really hungry, I'll have like a meat stick, or I'll have some protein. Maybe I'll have a protein shake depending on the day and when I'm doing my exercise. But dinners are typically more, I'm very standard in my house. It's like a protein, a carb, and a fiber. Like usually it's going to be like a vegetable, right? And vegetable, and then also like a salad if my kids will allow me to make it, that kind of thing. So it's pretty straightforward. I don't make things too complicated in my house. I don't like to snack very much. If I'm going to have anything like for dessert, I'm usually going to be like a dark chocolate, that kind of thing. I like, what have I been having recently? I think that's usually what I have is a dark chocolate for the most part in the evenings. And supplementation wise, it really does optimize depending on what my laboratory data is showing. Usually that's B vitamins. That's definitely part of it. Usually what else I have, if depending on my light exposure, it'll be some vitamin D complex with A, D, and K together. There's so many more that I'm forgetting right now, but some glandulars as well from hormone support and more.
All right, Dr. Scott, we're going to leave it here for today. We're going to link up your supplements, hyperbaric oxygen, your light panels, all your different products, the different websites there, social media, your YouTube channel, everything linked up in the show notes. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.
You rock, man. Thanks so much for having me, Jesse. Have a great rest of your day.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
I don't think that there's one better anti-aging, life-enhancing substance or biohacking thing that you could do than supplementing with melatonin. Sleep is just a little piece of melatonin.